I'll just use mine.
Okay. I'm just waiting for Florida to put the interpreters on also Claire and Pam. If she does show up, they can just come in and sneak in, but we'll keep an eye out for them. Yeah, so we're ready to get off.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us in the Rasmussen Theater today at the National Museum of the American Indian. Today's programming is featuring Day of the Dead, and we are going to be looking at a special feature of that for this program. My name is Hayes Lavis, and I work in the Museum Programs Department here at the NMAI. And just a few quick housekeeping things. No food or drink in the theater. Water's allowed, and please silence your cell phones for the program. And after the program, we will be doing a Q&A. If you want to come up to the front of the stage, I will bring the mic over for you to ask your questions. And now, so today's program features Cynthia Vid, who works in the museum's research department. Cynthia has been researching Day of the Dead for most of her academic career. Today, she will be talking about the history of the Xolo within the Dia de los Muertos celebration. So let's give a warm welcome to Cynthia.
Thank you, Hayes, and thank you for all of you for coming up and listening to this. This is going to be a really informal conversation. There will not be a test. I could have you all do spelling tests with all of these now what words that we're going to throw at you, but I won't do that for you. Maybe tomorrow we can do prizes for people who can actually say it and pronounce them and spell them. Spelling is a great part. This is a great pleasure for me to be able to talk to you about this particular aspect of it. When I first started doing this research, there was nothing to be read about it. There was a few really heavy-duty genetic studies. There were some other things that were done from maybe the 50s, but it was really difficult to get any material. And I literally can't keep up with all of the material that's being produced right now. There's a lot of really interesting work that's being done in the academic world with genetics and all sorts of stuff, studies of how dogs got into the Americas and so on and so forth, as well as some of the things related to the breeding programs that exist now. There's still very little that goes on about the culture associated with these dogs. So everything that I'm going to tell you today is going to be an overview. Each one of these slides could be a lecture in and of themselves. At some point, there might be some interest, and we can develop this a little bit differently. But this is just an overview for you to get to understand a little bit about these dogs and their history and the meaning in Mexico and their association with Day of the Dead.
So, Cynthia, what is a Xolo?
Well, if you were to look at my dog, my Xoloitzcuintli, you'd think it's a hot mess. They're wonderful dogs, and they're quite delightful, but they have this very, very long history. It is a dog breed that is native to Mexico. There are estimates that say that they're anywhere between 3,500 and 5,000 years old, which means it's a really, really old breed of dogs. Their full name is so-called Xoloitzcuintli, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but they're commonly called xolos. It makes it easier for everybody, and plus it's just a long name. In some circles, it's referred to as a Mexican hairless. It's a really unique-looking dog. Most of us are familiar with the hairless variety of them, but they can be hairless and they can be coated. A lot of people don't realize that in the same litter you can have a coated variety of the dog. If they are hairless, there is a good sense that they will not have a full set of teeth that goes genetically connected to the fact that they don't have any hair. And if they are coated, if they're, there tends to be short little hair that they have, but they will have a full set of teeth there, and you can tell the difference between them if you're looking at them. But they look the same except for the fact that one has hair and the other doesn't. They're available in 3 sizes. The largest one is about the size of a Dalmatian. You can think about that. They're not quite as heavy, but about that stature. They come in a variety of colors. I've seen everything from pitch black to various shades of gray to mottled, kind of a peach color, a pink color. So they come in a variety of colors. They are considered in the dog world a primitive breed, and that simply means that they've had very little human involvement in their evolution, that they're pretty much the way they originated on there. We'll talk a little bit about the recovery program for these dogs in a bit, and we'll talk about them. We do know that dogs have been very important in Mesoamerican cultures. Dogs are important in cultures around the world throughout time and place. We do know about this in Mexico. We do know that several varieties existed. Most of them no longer exist as they were found when the Europeans first arrived. And we have evidence to this from archaeological sites, from codices that were pre-Columbian, also post-contact work that was done, and also from Spanish chroniclers. This dog has really strong mythical connections. It is a dog that is deeply ingrained into cosmologies. And when we talk about this portion, I just want to footnote this, that most of what we know has come out of the work that's been done on the Aztec Empire, or the Mexicas. That was the largest population, that was the kind of the biggest government, biggest civilization when the Europeans arrived. And that's where a lot of the documentation took place there. But these dogs have existed throughout Mexico with various communities, but most of what we associate with their kind of mythological and their cosmology collections comes from our understanding of the Aztec world. So to start off with, their name in and of itself has this meaning. So it's Xoloitzcuintli. So Xolo is for the Lord Xolotl, and we're going to talk about him in a bit, and Itzcuintli, which is the Nahuatl word for dog. So you can see, if you go and read about pre-Columbian dogs, you'll see different words, and then Itzcuintli afterwards, so it's a variety of a dog, and then it's very clear in the way they've identified it. It's particularly important because it was created from a sliver of the bone of life from which humanity also comes with. So we're deeply connected to this dog spiritually and in terms of cosmologies. So who is this Lord Xolotl? He is the Lord of lightning and fire, amongst other things. If you look at the pantheon of Aztec lords and ladies, they are, I guess a good way to kind of describe them is think of Catholic saints, that they all have some sort of domain over certain aspects of life there. It's normally portrayed as a human body with a dog head. In this particular version, you see it kind of more in dog form. It's got dog feet, appendages, and it's got definitely the dog face on there. It can manifest, Xolotl can be manifested as both a dog and also a salamander, which have become really, really popular of late. They're called ajolotes or axolotls, and they are unique to the waters of around Mexico City, where the famous floating gardens are located. And one of the many things that it does, it is a guide to Mictlan, or the land of the dead. And again, we refer to kind of an Aztec cosmology about the afterlife. And there's 9 tiers that you go through, and in each tier there's a challenge that you have to go through. And you need to have the aid of a dog, and particularly to cross this particular river here, the Apano Huacalhuilla. And this is a modern image of what this river looks like. And this is where the story about the color of the dog comes in, because depending on who you talk to and what region in the country, some will say, well, you need to have a pitch black dog. That is the dog that ideally takes you across into Mictlan. This dog ferries you on his back on there. And some will say to you, no, you need to have a dog with a lighter coat, because that indicates that he hasn't made that many journeys, so this dog won't be as tired. So again, these are discrepancies that depend on who you're talking to and what region of the country that you're looking at. So let's assume that you've made it through all layers of Mictlan into your final resting place. You would come upon the Lord of the afterlife, or the Lord of the underworld, and it would be tradition to bring gifts on there. And in this particular glyph, you can see that here's this soul has appeared, giving the gifts to the Lord of the underworld, and there is a dog symbol above it that is guiding them. So basically, the moral of the story here is you've got to be nice to dogs, because if you're not nice to dogs, you get stranded kind of in a limbo, and you don't get to your eternal resting place. And we all want to go to some place that's cool and we can chill out. So they become very, very important. Okay. One of the other sources of evidences that we have are these clay effigies that are commonly referred to as Colima dogs. They have been found throughout Mexico, but there's a great concentration in the region of the state of Colima on there, and they were found in these shaft tombs The dog on the far left is actually in our collection. And the tradition was that if you were somebody of resources and means, that you would be buried along with your dog. And I just read a source that said if you did not have enough money to have a dog, you were buried with a clay effigy of the dog as a symbol that would just be there kind of in spirit to help you get across to the afterlife. And as I said, these have been found in cultural groups throughout the country. We do also know that we have evidences from codices and that were pre-colonial, and you can see the different kind of graphic styles. The two on the left are pre-Columbian codices, and then the two images of the dogs on the right side are things that were done often by native scribes or native authors, but with done in conjunction with a lot of the priests that were in the country documenting the local history and culture. We do know that by the beginning of the 20th century, for the most part, we thought that they had all but disappeared.
So what caused the steep decline in the Xolos population?
There's several theories about that, Hayes. One says that these animals were ritual in nature, so they were actually served as sacrifice during certain ceremonies. Some studies say that the native peoples themselves would breed them for food. I'm inclined to think as a Xolo owner that that's not very viable because they're not very heavy dogs. There's not a lot of meat on them. They tend to be very, very, very lean. There are varieties of dogs, however, that have all but disappeared that were very round and kind of dense, like you saw in the previous image. I would be more inclined to think that that was used for consumption as opposed to the cholotl. And particularly because of the sacred role of cholotl in society, I would have a difficult time thinking that he would be consumed locally, except for ritualistic purposes. The biggest impact comes when Europeans arrive, and they start consuming these dogs and basically annihilate the population. And so I said, we do know that this breed was actually registered in the late 1800s in the American Kennel Club, and at one point get dropped off, and then they just kind of disappear for several decades, and that's why they thought that the dogs were all but gone.
So we are seeing a revitalization of the breed now. What do you think we owe that to?
This is a kind of a really crazy story because it's not kind of this linear line that you look through history and time and say step A happened, step B happened, step C happened. No, it's just kind of this confluence of all sorts of things and the stars being aligned and certain individuals coming together. So the breed was rescued because of these circumstances. And interestingly enough, you have these interesting characters that come into play here. Dog fanciers, you have artists, then you have, later in the 20th century mass media, and of course now Day of the Dead. But it all gets kicked off around the Mexican Revolution. So the Mexican Revolution runs for between 1910 and 1920 approximately, and Mexico is going through a major upheaval. And the fellow at the far left is Porfirio Diaz, who is the president for various terms. And he had this idea that in order for Mexico to progress, they had to become more European. They had to get rid of their Indian characteristics on there. And they just had to aspire to be European in all manner of things. And you can see here just by his uniform, he looks like something that would have come out of Europe in terms of a military person. But this, in fact, is the president of Mexico. This is also the time frame where we had the rise of these heroes in Mexican culture, such as Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. What happens as a result of the Mexican Revolution is this need for Mexico to create itself and to create a sense of Mexicanness and create a sense of identity. It's often said that the Mexican Revolution was the way that Mexico got to meet other people in Mexico, because everybody used to live in their villages and not go out. But because of the war, troops were moving to different parts of the country, and they were coming face to face with other Mexicans that were very different from them in the way they were in terms of their cultures and in their languages. So there was this need for the creation of a Mexican nation. In Spanish, it's referred to as haciendo patria, literally making nation on there. So It led to a great search of symbols that united the country. You saw the beginning of the growth of ballet folklorico that we associate with Mexican culture, with mariachi music, and also the muralist movement. And there was great leadership under the Ministry of Education that promoted the development of these icons. A lot of these symbols look back at indigenous culture. It can be criticized that it was looking at an indigenous past, not in a contemporary indigenous situation. But this is where you begin to see all of these symbols kind of being incorporated into Mexican artwork and kind of a sense of itself. If you look at Mexican currency, it's absolutely exquisite. It draws a lot upon Mexican iconography and famous heroes of indigenous nations of Mexico. So you have here, again, this interesting set of characters that come together. One of them is William Spratling, who is an American, like many other Americans who are down in Mexico at this time. William Spratling becomes quite famous because of his role in vitalizing the silver work in the city of Tasco. And he is good friends with other people in the art world, including Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. How many of you have heard of either of these artists? Okay, they're pretty common. That we in the United States know about them. Frida has become kind of an iconic image of women empowerment throughout the world now. Well, these are all artists that are talking to each other. They're looking back at Mexican symbols. If you look at Diego Rivera's artwork, you see a tremendous evolution from his artwork when he first starts off as a young artist, from the time that he's in Europe and the influences that European art has on him. By the time he comes back into Mexico at this post-revolutionary period, his style changes quite dramatically and incorporates all of these indigenous icons in there. Well, William Spratling, this is one of those conversations that you have over a cup of coffee because there's many twists and turns of this. William Spratling had a ranch on the western side of Mexico, and there was rumors that there were these xolos that were found on there, and sure enough, there were. He ended up gifting Diego Rivera a number of these xolos. Diego Rivera then takes them, and he becomes probably one of the biggest advocates for the recovery of this breed. So because he's hanging out with all of these other celebrities in the art world, like Francisco Toledo, you can see him there with his cholo, and then you have the Bravo, who are a husband and wife pair that were photographers. You had all of these folks just promoting the recovery of these dogs. And the Bravos, among other photographers, actually produced a tremendous number of photographs that have been formally documenting the existence of these dogs. Probably my next branch of research on this is going to catalog all of these images of all glitterati that had these dogs because they are fundamental to the saving of the breed on there. And then they became incorporating them into their art itself. And here's an example of Diego Rivera's Dream on a Sunday afternoon in Alameda Central Park. This is a massive piece of artwork. It's something like 45 feet. And if you look here at the very bottom corner under this girl with the white dress, there's a little Xoloitzcuintli right there. There's so much happening in these murals that sometimes it's easy to overlook the presence of them. But he put all of these symbols in there. And it's quite interesting that he does this in this particular painting because you have all of these Mexicans who are dressed in European fashion. And there's a lot of criticism about indigenous Mexicans that are trying to become European in nature, and just kind of the vanity of trying to go to other cultures to draw for inspiration, for art, for culture, for cuisine and stuff. And he always kind of inserts these symbols that relate to Mexican indigenous culture. Here's some other examples, and you have, this is Frida Kahlo's painting on the left, and you see her favorite dog was named Señor Cholotl, and he's right here in the bottom left on her arm that's there. The next image is another mural by Diego Rivera, and it's a warrior with a little Xolotl, Xoloitzcuintli, that's right by his feet. And the other one is an earlier image, and it's a small-scale painting with this dog looking up at this child playing with a toy. There. And you have another person who becomes really important in the recovery of these dogs. Her name is Dolores Oleda. She was a very successful businesswoman and a tremendous patron of the arts. She probably had the greatest collection of Rivera and Xolo artwork that was found in Mexico. And she supported all of these artists, just was a tremendous supporter. Diego Rivera gifts her a dog, and from that dog she ends up having a whole pack of other Xoloitzcuintlis. And this other photo is of the Olmeda Art Museum, and there is a statue on the grounds, and then she has the pack of dogs that live there at the museum. She has since passed away, but that's kind of one of the things that really signals kind of her passion for all things Mexican and also these dogs. So we're not through yet. We've got other people involved in this. So we had this woman who is the Archduchess Felix of Austria. She's better known as the Countess Lassalle of Premio Real. She was routinely called Lassie, and she was the driving force behind an expedition that goes into the jungles of the state of Colima to look for this dog. You see here a photograph with two standard-sized Xoloitzcuintlis. And I have yet to find an image of Norman Pelham Wright, who is a dog expert, and he, just got enthralled with the idea of finding out if these things still existed or not. And he goes out, and there was this major expedition. They identify all these dogs, and then they identified, sources have different numbers, anywhere from 5 to 10 dogs that were identified in western Mexico that were then collected and taken into the systematic breeding of these dogs so that they could recover the breed. Again, the Archduchess was actually from Canada or born in Canada, and Wright was British. So you have all of these people that are not necessarily the Mexicans. It's just this confluence, all of these folks coming together. And then, of course, we have mass media. How many of you have seen the movie Coco? Yeah. And was that your first exposure to Xoloitzcuintli when you see Dante the dog? Had you seen this? Okay. How many of you have actually seen a Xoloitzcuintli live? Any of you have them? My neighbor's here that's got her dog that plays with my dog on a regular basis. This is a really interesting phenomena that happens with dogs. We've seen it with, remember Lady and the Tramp? The 101 Dalmatians, that all of a sudden people become aware of these breeds, and there's this mad drive to go and acquire these dogs. Well, this character Dante plays this Xoloitzcuintli. It's really intriguing to see this image here with his tongue sticking out. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the hairless variety that do not have a full set of teeth. So their tongues will sometimes just escape out of the side of their mouth here. So Dante becomes a kind of an unwilling hero in this story and helps Manuel go through his adventures as he goes through.
And I was going to ask too, is I know looking on the internet and other art forms, we've seen a lot of alebrije and skeleton painted cholos. What's brought this about?
Well, certainly, I think this movie has done that because the alebrijes, some of you may have seen that these are kind of fantastical figures that are brightly colored, and they actually came out from Mexico City with this artist who was literally having a fever dream, and this is what came to him. It's since become a pretty a recognized art form that's done in both papier-mâché. You've had papier-mâché alebrije artists in the past here, but it's also taken root in Oaxaca. Where you have a lot of artists interpreting in copal wood on there. But I think it comes from this movie where Dante becomes an alebrije in form, and he grows his wings and so on and so forth. So here you have some pictures of what happens now that we have Day of the Dead. I've yet to find any reference that talks about the dogs actually returning with our loved ones for Day of the Dead, but they become so seared together that it's because of the story of their role in taking you to Mictlan that they become seared together. The role of Coco and the storyline that's developed there also further sears them together. And so now you have all sorts of parades throughout Mexico. There was never this big Day of the Dead parade in Mexico until the James Bond 007 movie came out that takes place in Mexico City. And that first action scene happens with him coming out during a parade. There was no such thing. It was something that was developed for the film. Well, as a result of that, particularly young Mexicans came to the Mexican government and said, like, we need a parade. So now there's parades on them. So now there's parades for the Catrinas, for the women with the fancy European dress. There's parades for alebrijes. There's an entire, and it's all packaged together around Day of the Dead programming in the city. So it further sears the idea that these dogs are connected with the actual return of our loved ones on there. And you can see this, again, these dogs are painted up. The one in the middle is, has got his marigolds around him. And the marigolds are symbolic because they help bring our loved ones back from the afterlife. They follow the scent and they follow the color. And like you were talking about this alebrije character, this dog on the right is really fascinating to me because he's painted up as an alebrije. And again, I'm pretty much thinking that it's coming from the influence of the film on there that transforms this Xoloitzcuintli into an alebrije. I didn't mention earlier that the dogs that don't have any hair can have a little crest, or they can have a little tuft on the side. They can have little random things that are called eyelashes, just kind of a one row of hair on their skin in random places. So this guy's got a kind of cute little kind of hair thing going on the top of his head. There. So that gets us to today. All of that is just a few decades that lead us up to what I refer to as Cholom Mania. Like I said, I used to scour all sorts of resources to find information about these dogs. Were not to be had. And now it is everywhere, literally. I challenge you to go home today and look at Google and see what you find, see what comes up on there. So everything from piñatas to digital games. So here you have an alebrije variety of Dante for a piñata. And if you look at this next site, this is a site for a digital game, and this little purple dot here, that's Xolo City on there. And I have found at least one other video game that has Xolos incorporated into them as well. You have also all of the merchandising that goes with this stuff, because you now have action figures, you have jewelry with Dante on them, you have the stuffed animals, you've got this t-shirts, and again, this t-shirt that says, "I'm so fly," is of Dante in alebrije form with all of that decoration.
So what do you believe is the role of the Xolo in art? Because we're certainly seeing more and more of that.
I think it has to do a little bit with the continuation of what happens after the Mexican Revolution, of Mexicans looking for symbols that connect them to their indigenous past or indigenous cultures. And Mexico has certainly matured quite a bit about its ways in which engages Native communities and Native cultures and takes them on as part and parcel of national identity on there. So, for example, here you have a whole world of tattoos. The variety of Xoloitzcuintli tattoos is incredible. Like everything you could possibly do that. But what's interesting about them, notice, is how they are intertwined with indigenous iconography. So the first dog has got all of this regalia and a headpiece that goes on with him. The one in the middle has this fretwork that's famous within archaeological sites that are on there. They're called mitlaquis. And then the last one kind of has a look that refers to the codices on there. It's rare that you will see a Xoloitzcuintli just kind of in its natural form. It usually has some sort of embellishment that ties it back to its indigenous icons. Just like these murals, the muralist movement continues to be very, very important in Mexico. Initially, when it was created by the Department of Education, it was a way to teach Mexican history and culture to a large population that didn't know how to read. Well, that has changed quite dramatically. Mexico has a very high literacy rate. There's no need for it. But the tradition of mural work is still there. And again, notice each one of these images has iconography that's related to indigenous communities that signal kind of regalia or things that you would associate with people that are in ceremonial garb. You see even in photography that's done there. I love this image because here's this dog kind of on a bed of corn. Corn is sacred in Mexico. Corn is sacred in indigenous communities. It originates from it. We found the oldest kernels of like pre-corn in a cave in Mexico. So you take this sacred animal and surround it by other sacred things around him. And then I love this other image because now this is kind of the influence of younger cultures that are coming into play. And I love it says, "Mas punk, I'm more punk than you." But using this cholo with, all sorts of kind of his little hairpiece is multicolored, such. And then we're really lucky that today you have David Amoroso that's out in the atrium area there, who is also an artist, and he does Xoloitzcuintlis in a variety of medium on there. His stuff is really phenomenal there. So if this wasn't enough, cholos have gotten so popular that they now have in the city of Colima an international cholo festival. Along with scenery, there's musicians, there's different performances. They take over a whole park in the area, and they have these statues. Now that we at the Smithsonian are very excited about having our pandas back, you see these fiberglass statues, throughout the city. Well, in the city of Colima, and now I've seen them in Mexico City. There's these fiberglass renderings of Xoloitzcuintli dogs as well, and because that isn't enough, we have to have a soccer team called Club Tijuana, the Xoloitzcuintlis de Caliente. They're in the northern part, and they have a whole range of merchandising there for the soccer team, but it makes this reference to cholos in all sorts of varieties. Just beautiful graphic design work that's done with them. That's a really, really fast overview. Like I said, every one of these slides we could have a separate discussion on because it's so deep, and the things that happen behind the scenes are certainly there. But today, we can just very comfortably say that the Xoloitzcuintli is a cultural treasure. In 2016, the mayor of the city declares him the official dog of Mexico City, and Mexico City is a very dog-friendly place. And now you see cholos from all over the city coming together at the different parks, just kind of coming and hanging out on Sunday afternoons. It is considered cultural patrimony for the entire nation. And again, you see a lot of the documentation about them, a lot of the interpretation associated with pre-Columbian regalia or even contemporary regalia. Here, this woman from Oaxaca in her very traditional huipil, the clothing that women wear, with her Xoloitzcuintli. He's been so significant that actually has postage stamps with Xoloitzcuintlis on there. And in Colima, the place that gives birth to the so-called Colima dogs that we all are familiar with, we had this gargantuan statue. And I use this particular image because you can see around the circle that there's a truck going by there. It gives you a sense of scale of how big this statue is. And Guillermo Rios, who is the clay artist that's done this, has also worked with the archaeological digs, doing a lot of restoration work on pieces that have come out of these archaeological sites. This is probably one of the most famous interpretations of these dogs, and people refer to them as the dancing dogs or the dancing Xoloitzcuintlis. But in reality, we have found out that this is got greater meaning, that it is an older Xoloitzcuintli, up close and personal with a younger Xoloitzcuintli, passing on traditional knowledge on there. So it's a very different interpretation from the dancing dogs on there. If any of you are interested, I can provide you photo sources because we have, I have an abundance of photographs now because they're just everywhere on there. So if you're interested in a particular image, I can certainly help you like that. And on behalf of my personal hot mess, Papaloto Monarca, I want to say thank you so much, Tascomatli, and in Nahuatl, gracias in Spanish, and muito obrigado in Portuguese, and thank you in English. Thank you for coming and listening to this.
So thank you, Cynthia. And now shall we join in? If you have any questions, if you want to come to the front of the stage. Any questions?
I actually have two questions for you. So the first question, if you ask the average American what they would name as a Mexican dog, they would say Chihuahua.
Oh, you're asking, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You're asking about the Chihuahua?
Yeah, how do they fit into it, and why are they such a I don't
They
know.
have certain aspects that they kind of look similar. They have very, very short hair, like the coated Xoloitzcuintli. There's a lot of genetic studies, and I'm not a geneticist. I'm a folklorist by training, so I'm scouring through the genetic studies and trying to understand as much as I can. There are different breeds. There are 3 breeds that are recognized as originating in Mexico today, which is the Xoloitzcuintli, the Chihuahua, and the Capullo, which is very exotic looking, but has very wolf-like characteristics. Double-coated, they tend to be black with some white marks, but those are the 3 breeds that exist. And the Chihuahua is the smallest of them, obviously. And even within the Chihuahua breed, there's different varieties within them.
And do you have any thoughts as to why the Chihuahua has such a popularity compared to the other 2?
I think one, because the Chihuahua has been around for such a long time, and it's been involved like in American Kennel Club associations that, we've seen them in the United States. They were really popular kind of in the golden age of American cinema, when there was a lot of filming that was happening in Mexico. A lot of U.S. artists and actors were hanging out in places like Acapulco and were acquiring these dogs. So they had been part of kind of the American dog scene for many, many decades, which was not the case of the Xolos. When the Chihuahua gets introduced into the United States in any significant level, the Xolos were thought to be extinct. This was the time that they were doing the expeditions in Colima, trying to identify them in the 50s, about 1955 or so is on there. So it's just kind of been more in the sense. And also we got to that stage where small dogs became very vogue in this country, where people were carrying, bags where you could tuck your dog away in there. The Xoloitzcuintli comes in the toy variety. I'm afraid that I would break a toy, because it really is quite little by comparison. I have the medium size, what's called a miniature, and they weigh about between 22 and 24 pounds, which is manageable for most people.
And then my second question is just, did you get this beautiful thing before you started your research or after?
No, I actually started doing research because I was trying to actually name a Dalmatian that I had, and I wanted to know what word. I'm going, well, what's a now what word for dog? And that's where I ran into Squeatley, and then that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. And I've been doing this work for a very long time, and it just would pop up in my research related to Day of the Dead, and then you have to understand the afterworld, you have to understand Mictlan, and then there's a place in Mictlan that's named after the place where the dogs are, and then there's all that mythology that goes in there. So it's kind of one of those things that you just pull a string and it just kept on going and going and going. And then my dog was a gift, and he was a COVID puppy. Because we were all going to be at home for who knows how long, and that's how I ended up with a dog. But it was just kind of one of those things. It's a dangerous thing to be a researcher, because you just kind of go after one thing after another, and you just become so enthralled with something that's really fascinating. This is, to me, as somebody who looks at culture and the evolution of culture, this whole culture around dogs is really fascinating around the world, and the relationship that human beings have with dogs, but particularly because it connects to my Day of the Dead research. I thought, well, why not? And here I am.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for your presentation. I am not myself Mexican-American or Chicano, but and I have a little understanding. But in your study of Cholom Mania, have you considered the resonance among Mexican-Americans with the word cholo, which has a certain connotation in Southern California, and as I understand it, sometimes a negative one, but now with the rise in popularity of the cholo within popular consciousness, kind of like a little resonance and sort of more Chicano pride?
Yeah, and that's certainly part of it. If you look in the art world in Los Angeles, for example, you look at Chicano Park, that is an area that's under an expressway, that the local artists have painted all of these indigenous symbols and kind of iconography on all of the vertical supports for the highway that runs above it. Certainly the Chicano movement was a moment in this United States where Mexican Americans had the first opportunity to say that we were indigenous as well as being European. To say that you were indigenous, it was a very difficult thing at that time. It was loaded with all sorts of prejudice and stereotypes. But with the Chicano movement, you had the birth of what is now Chicano studies in the university world, but Chicano art, Chicano literature. So a lot of visual references are made to these dogs. There are a lot of Cholo owners, and I'm quite the TikTok addict, I have to confess, and I see, but it's research, okay? But I see a lot of Xoloitzcuintli owners putting out video clips about their dogs on there. And there's, given this time of year, they're showing like, this is how I'm painting my dog for the Day of the Dead parade on there. So that's certainly playing off of it. I think it happens for two similar reasons, but under distinct circumstances in Mexico compared to the United States, because this was a Mexican-American experience or a Chicano experience compared to what was happening in Mexico. Both a sense of recovering identity, recovering indigeneity, but it plays out in different kind of cultural circumstances and different historical circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was a very good question. Again, we could be here for 4 hours just hitting on the highlights of this stuff.
I'll ask one last question for you, Cynthia. Where do you think that the Cholo is going in the future?
Well, I'm really happy to see that the breed has survived and it's here, and it has a lot to teach us about the mindsets of native peoples at the arrival of Europeans, and some people still have deeply spiritual connections to these dogs. We didn't even begin to talk about how the dogs are perceived to be natural healers. Their body temperature runs hotter than a normal dog and theirs, so they're like little hot water bottles. So there's a lot of people who are still very personally connected to it in terms of their spirituality. I have some concerns because, again, mass media, I mean, we can't put that genie back in the bottle, and a lot of misinformation is going to continue to go out about these animals, a lot of perceptions that are not precise, and a lot of perceptions that have developed as, again, this consequence of kind of all of these forces coming into play that we talked about briefly. I'm absolutely in love with the breed, and I would very much consider having them. They are not for first-time dog owners. If you do not have skills with the dog and know about dog behavior, because they are very smart and they're very independent. My neighbor here can tell you to attest to my dog. But I am concerned that because they become so popular, this leads to the possibility of breeding that's not done with a great care. If you buy from a reputable breeder, they've really looked at the genetics of both the dam and the sire on the dogs. They're very careful about not crossing them. Again, if you stop and think that this breed was essentially rescued from a population of about 10 to 12 dogs, the possibility to breed incorrectly is certainly there. I think they're going to be very important. They're going to continue to be important in Mexican culture, and more people are going to acquire these dogs. I think they're going to be more prevalent in the United States now. At any one time in the United States, about 3,000 dogs exist in the United States. On there, just by a whole series of circumstances, there's actually 4 of them in our neighborhood. I thought they were talking about, I know, right? I thought that they were talking about American hairless terrier that looked very similar to them, but they are actually Xoloitzcuintlis in a dog. In the world, there's about 30,000 of them, which is a relatively small amount of dogs. But interestingly enough, they're all over the world in weird places, starting with Russia. There is like this love for Xoloitzcuintlis in Russia like you couldn't believe, which is not where you would naturally think that a hairless dog would feel comfortable in, which also brings up the business of clothing for Xoloitzcuintlis as a result of that. So you can get online and buy Mexican-themed clothing for your Xoloitzcuintli now. You can buy a whole line of skincare products because they're hairless and they have certain care needs that are associated with them. So I think they're going to continue to be popular. We just have to be very careful about the breeding aspects of the dog. And I think in terms of the United States and Day of the Dead, that's going to continue to reinforce the presence of these dogs.
Thank you, Cynthia. And yes, Monarca is quite a talkative dog. He's very strong on his opinions, and he likes to share them.
Yeah. I think there's.
Did you have another question?
Yes, and again, remember at the beginning I was talking about when we talked about their role in society, we tended to refer to the Mexica, the Aztec Empire, because that's where we had the greatest source of information from at contact. But we do know that the Mayas had word for them down in the Yucatan and Chiapas region, and they've been found in the city of Tula. Bones have been found in the archaeological site in the city of Tula, which is on the east coast of Mexico. There is thought that they were throughout what is contemporary Mexico. We didn't talk about other hairless dogs in the Americas because there's the Peruvian orchid. There's an Argentine dog that's also considered genetically connected with these dogs. Like I said, I'm just now scouring through the genetic studies, and my college biology is not helping much on trying to understand this, but there are people who are really kind of looking at dogs in the Americas before contact.
And then my other question is, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but where are there lots of, but like dog breeders that have them in the United States or around the world? Like how long?
There's dog breeders all over the place. In fact, I found a dog breeding site in Russia that's called Cholom Mania, actually, to do that. But there are breeders throughout different places. There's a story that we published in our NMAI magazine on Xoloitzcuintlis, and there's this one woman that said she was traveling in Europe and she actually saw a mural of a Xoloitzcuintli in Europe on there. We do believe that they were taken to Europe after contact, so they were exposed to that part of the world. There are cholos in Cuba, and they believe that they went to Cuba as part of the Spanish Main that used to come, through the Pacific, come and land on the western part of Mexico and the coast around Acapulco. They would take all of the produce that they had acquired in Asia, take it across land, and then go to the port of Veracruz and go from the Veracruz out. The first stop was in Cuba, and they believe that that's how these dogs got there. But in Cuba, there's both a Xoloitzcuintli club in Cuba that has dog shows, but there's also just a kind of a street variety of dogs that's referred to as perros chinos, Chinese dogs, because it was something that came possibly through the Spanish Manila that they thought was, that they came from China. Like all they knew that dogs ended up in Cuba that were not Cuban in origin, and they ended up with these large shipments of things that also came from Asia on there. So there are a lot of breeders. There is a Xoloitzcuintli club there's a Xoloitzcuintli club in the United States as well as in Mexico, and I would really defer to them. There's a lot of good information about them in terms of breeding and how to select a good breeder and a source for your dog if you're interested in.
Okay, that's all we have time for today, so thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to Cynthia. That was amazing.
Well, thank you.
I learned a lot. So the activities are out in the Potomac. The groups are performing once more each. Enjoy your visit.
Okay. I'm sorry that you ended up